Daniela, should we start? Please.
Boa noite a todos e todas. A aula de hoje será ministrada em inglês. Para ouvir a tradução ao vivo, basta clicar no botão Interpretation, localizado na parte inferior do Zoom, e selecionar o idioma da sua preferência. Gostaríamos também de lembrar que os certificados serão emitidos 30 dias após a última aula do curso, e para obtê-los é necessário assistir pelo menos 3 aulas completas e completar o formulário de presença. Nossa equipe de suporte está disponível no chat para qualquer dúvida ou pergunta. Sinta-se à vontade para enviar suas dúvidas, para enviar as perguntas que tem para o professor, para o Dr. Clifford. E, bom, passo a palavra para o professor Leandro Piquet, coordenador da Escola de Segurança Multidimensional.
Obrigado, Daniela. Professor Clifford, eu vou me dirigir aos nossos alunos aqui em português. Professor, é um prazer enorme poder receber hoje aqui nesse seminário especial do curso sobre racismo no trabalho policial. Basicamente, eu queria enfatizar a importância do professor Clifford em termos acadêmicos. O professor Clifford é professor associado de ciência política da Universidade de Carolina do Norte. Ele tem um PhD na Universidade de Rochester, em Nova York, e há 25 anos o professor Clifford tem se dedicado a temas importantes sobre economia política no Caribe e na América Latina. Os temas de publicação, de pesquisa, consultoria, intervenções do professor Clifford tratam de questões como tráfico de dinheiro, lavagem de dinheiro, migração e comércio na região, né? Comércio, desenvolvimento e segurança pública. E o professor Clifford Griffin é autor de 2 livros importantes sobre questões ligadas ao Caribe e a dinâmica da economia política no Caribe. E eu acho que recomendo fortemente que todos os alunos e alunas façam um Google, né, no site do professor Clifford, e encontrarão também uma quantidade expressiva de artigos importantes publicados nos mais importantes jornais, nos mais importantes periódicos da América Latina, das Américas, e com uma grande contribuição, como eu disse, nesses temas ligados à questão de crime, imigração, lavagem de dinheiro. E, não menos importante, o professor Clifford Griffin foi professor visitante aqui no Instituto de Relações Internacionais, colaborou com o Núcleo de Estudos da Violência e tem sempre nos brindado com assim, uma enorme e calorosa receptividade no que diz respeito a essa iniciativa do nosso curso sobre racismo. Então, é um enorme prazer poder convidar aqui o professor Clifford para a sua conferência essa noite. Muito obrigado, professor Clifford.
Okay, thank you, Professor Piquet, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Primero, boa noite a todos brasileiros. Buenas noches a todos de los otros países de América Latina. Good night to those who are from the English-speaking world. It's a very great pleasure for me to once again be interacting with my colleagues at USP, particularly Institute of International Relations, where I spent some time with over the past 12 years of collaboration with colleagues at USP. So this is a very interesting topic, which I have chosen to, and then can I operate their slide, or is somebody going to do that? Daniela? Yeah, okay, so when I was approached to participate in this symposium, I wondered, it took some time to think through my own approach. I didn't want to be presenting ideas that sort of are similar or identical to others. I wanted to make sure that my contribution provides useful insights to practitioners who are part of the course and to whom the course and the material is being shared. And I wanted to do so in a comprehensive way. So the theme is racism in policing. And when I'm thinking about it, I wanted to make sure that the medium does not become the message. I'll say exactly what I mean by that. If you turn to the next slide, Daniela. Right. This slide is something that has captivated the attention of people, not only in the United States, but all around the world. And it is associated with the response of the broader public, the general public, to what has been described, what has been seen as the result of violence being perpetrated, being visited upon people of color, particularly African Americans in the United States, largely by white police officers. And so the way it's described is that police are racist, or there's racism in policing. And I thought, if it is the case that the police institutions in this country and elsewhere, the police organizations are composed of white people, non-white people, but that the way that violence is perpetrated doesn't discriminate between the races of the police or the ethnicities of the police who are involved in the violence. And so it poses a really profoundly important question. Is this racism? So I took some time to think about that. But before I get into the discussion, I think context is important. So let me give you a couple of quick anecdotes that help to shape my thinking on this before I get into my central argument. About 40 years ago, a friend of mine who was a veteran, he was a police officer at the Veterans Hospital, and we were playing tennis. We're tennis players. After the game, we were sitting around and talking, and shortly thereafter, a friend of his pulled up. It turns out that this person came from underserved or marginalized neighborhood, but now he was a member of the New Haven, Connecticut Police Service. During the conversation, he said something that was really profoundly striking to me. He was describing a practice within the organization, and he was about to embark on that practice. Like around 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, they will drive through certain neighborhoods, marginalized neighborhoods, and they will look for people who seem to be, in one way or another, violating the law. So he was driving this unmarked police van, and he was telling us that in the van, there are no seats. There's nothing to hold on to. So they will grab the suspects, they will put them in the back of the van, and they will drag them around to the roughest roads with the most corners, and they'll knock them around in the van, and then they'll drive them to the precinct. But they made sure that when they got to the precinct, it was too late for them to appear before a magistrate, which would mean then that we'll have to stay in jail until Monday morning. So this is Friday afternoon to Monday morning. So I thought, here is someone who came from a depressed neighborhood. He has joined the New Haven Police Force. He's gotten a vehicle. He has given a weapon. He's given a salary, and so his situation is demonstrably better than it was for many others from the same neighborhood from which he came. What is it about the uniform, the badge, the gun, and the vehicle that suddenly transformed this person into this powerful entity visiting violence against people from his own community? That is something that I witnessed very early on, and I'm sort of thinking about that within the context of racism in policing. So is this person racist, or is he engaging in a practice that has been institutionalized? And so that is one of the points I want to put on the table here for discussion. Of course, the second is much more personal, which I want to share because it helps also to contextualize my remarks. And this happened to me, and so my colleagues here from Sao Paulo would know, are familiar with Fadia Lima, and around 12:30 one day, the midst of lunch hour and rush hour, and I was accosted by two members of the Policia Militar. And for the first time in my life, I was in this really sort of life and death situation. I was crossing the street, and I got caught off by these two police officers on motorcycles, and one of them pulled a gun on me. And they backed me up against the wall. One was a white police officer, the other was a black police officer. And the black police officer set about accosting me in a most demeaning way, attempting to dehumanize me. And even after I said to him and showed him that I had my credentials, that I was there as a visiting professor at USP, and everybody in Sao Paulo knows USP. It took him about 10 minutes before he acknowledged that I was not the person whom he had in mind that I might be. But here's what was so striking about that. During that encounter, I had one thought in mind. I needed to walk away from this encounter. I did not want to be carried away. So I obeyed. I followed every single instruction. And so I wondered, why me? Now, two police officers, one white, one black man, probably looking different in Sao Paulo. Why did he pick on me? I don't know. But even so, why did the black police officer, why was he the one who was so much more aggressive and invasive to my person? That again raised the question, what is it about the training or the institution of policing, whether it is in the United States or in Brazil or some other racially segmented country, that we see these kinds of behaviors being perpetrated on citizens? And so those two episodes, I think, helped me shape and structure my remarks. And so I want to start off then by posing three questions, or three types of questions that one must ask and get answers to when we're trying to figure out not only if there's racism in police, what is the nature of racism in policing, how and why is it perpetrated, and of course, later on, we'll get to what can be done about it. So the next slide is a how question. How do police see themselves? What is their role? How does the community view the police? These questions, I think, are really central to understanding this phenomenon. So if you go to the next two slides, you will see the next slide. Next one, please. Next one, please. Okay. So I went searching to find out how police see themselves. And this motto from the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police, states very clearly that their role is to protect and serve, to protect and serve. And this motto was adopted in 1963. And this has become the basis of the vision and mission of many other police organizations throughout North America. If you look down to the middle at the bottom of the slide, you'll see a picture with a star on it. That is the emblem of the police service in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. It says to protect and serve. And right next to it is the emblem of the police organization in the island of Barbados. And it says to serve, protect, and reassure. So from to protect and serve, to serve, honor, and protect, to protect and serve, to serve, protect, and reassure. The impression that's conveyed here is that the organizations see themselves in a particular role. How that role is interpreted varies from police organization to police organization, varies from country to country. So if you go to the next slide, the question that comes to my mind then is to protect and serve whom? Whom are the police designed to protect and serve? Well, for the answer to that, let's go to the next slide and let's go back to the 17th century. The next slide, please. And let me introduce you to a philosopher by the name of John Locke. Now, John Locke is very important in the United States because his philosophy, particularly his second treatise of government, was central to the creation of the United States Constitution. Here is what the essence of the treatise says. There's a quote on the next page, on the next slide, please. It says, men agree to enter civil society and establish government. The agreement must protect the propertied from the non-propertied, as well as against each and against arbitrary government. So this is very important. The agreement to enter civil society and establish government is designed to protect those who have property from those who don't have property. And this is as old as one can get. Now, if we turn to the next slide, you will see, and I reference here, Nicole Siegel. Oh, just go back one slide, please. Yes. Where it says, on policing in the United States, police forces were established to regulate and continue to regulate the behavior of citizens to ensure those in political power and those who hold wealth keep it. Police forces were established to regulate and continue to regulate the behavior of citizens to ensure those in political power and those who hold wealth keep it. And the final theoretical frame is the next slide. Let me read that to you. So this comes from Justice Tankebe, writing on colonialism, legitimation, and policing in Ghana in West Africa. And it says the object of the colonial imperialist expansion throughout the 19th century, that object was not political, but economic. The objectives were the extraction of raw materials, excess capital production, and capital export. And the colonial police were necessary for the kind of order that protects the property and personal safety of the colonial capitalists, as well as securing certain of the conditions of labor discipline. All of these excerpts, to my mind, clearly explain the role of the police in all of the countries that have been visited by European colonialism, whether it's the United States, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Argentina, whether it's Ghana, whether it's Trinidad and Tobago. There seems to be a direct connection between the role of the police and the protection of private property and the elite. This is not to say that there isn't a role and expectation of protection for and on behalf of the rest of society. But it is important to understand why citizens in general seem to have a very negative opinion and perspective of police forces. And this is what I want to get to. So I'm saying here, as my contribution to this conversation, that there's something about the existing structure and organization of police forces, whether they're in the United States of America, whether they're in the UK or in Barbados or wherever. And that is where I'm going here. So the next slide is where I begin my argument. My argument is that the modern world in which police are being asked and expected to protect and serve is a lot different. It's much more dynamic, much more differentiated than the world of 500 years ago when John Locke was writing his second treatise. Our modern world is complex. The traditional mode of policing and problem solving does not allow us to understand and engage with the modern world's complexity. In other words, we need to have a much more integrated, dynamic way of thinking about not only the needs of society, but the needs of the different constituents in society in order for the police to really deliver on what the modern world is expecting of them. And so this brings me to my second point in the argument. Next slide, please. I'm contending that there's a social tension within all of our societies. And it's based on the fact that the police system is a closed system. The rest of society is dynamically changing. And the policing methods do not reflect the needs of a changing society. So let me say that again. Attention has always existed in society, but as society has become more complex, much more dynamic, the very same structure and process by which policing has historically been conducted is being used today, and it has not evolved to reflect the changing times in which we live. And so therein lies part of the problem. So next slide, please, Daniela. So my contention is that contemporary policing systems, whether they are in Brazil or the United States or the UK or wherever, they are closed systems, they're controllable systems, they're predictable systems, because they're based on historically developed perspectives and mindsets, and they have not sufficiently evolved to reflect the changes that have been taking place in society and among peoples. And so they operate on the assumption that if we know the parts of what's happening, right, or what has happened in the past, we can then take action to remedy the situation without looking at the situation in and of itself to find out exactly what is going on. They're using past experience and past methods and perspectives and trying to bring them to bear on situations that are different. So in other words, the policing system is static. And when things get difficult, when things get uncertain, like the George Floyd killings and others, the institution tends to even become more tightened and structured in its process, rather than flexible and open and recognize that there needs to be a different set of approaches to the phenomenon. So my contention then is on the next page, Daniela. So we're talking about racism in policing, and I am contending that racism in policing is a function of closed systems, and that closed systems operate on particular biases and beliefs about certain communities and certain individuals. Those historically established beliefs and biases continue to be used today, even as societies and people have evolved and changed. And therein lies the tension. Therein lies the tension. So it's not surprising to me that a non-white person can engage in what appears to be racially motivated behavior against other non-white people. One can say that that has been the result of internalized racism. But it might also be the case that that's the nature of the organization. For example, farther down in the slides, I have some information on what are the requirements to join the police force in Brazil and in some parts of the United States. You don't have to have a college degree. 18 years old, physical fitness, some assessment of your mental stability. And then you're given a badge and a gun and authority and power. And because it's a hierarchical institution, part of your process is to be promoted. How do you get promoted in an organization? You're expected to follow certain procedures. If the procedures that a new recruit is presented with are the same ones that have the same biases, the same beliefs about certain communities of 50 years ago, then the behavior of that new recruit, whether he or she is white or non-white, is going to be expected to be the same that the superiors or the mentors in the organization are using as a way of evaluating and assessing the candidates' chances for promotion. So that's, I think, is a big problem. So I would say then, next slide, please, Daniela. Because of the closeness of the system, the problem with contemporary policing systems is that they do not use what we call feedback loops, taking information, bringing it back into the organization, revising, revisiting, and updating the policies and procedures. Feedback loops are needed to provide information that is useful to changing the attitudes and behaviors among the police. If this does not happen, then we'll continue to do things the very same way, maintain the same biases, treat the same people the same way, even though they are, the people themselves have changed. So if there is no basis for updating these initial biases that police have, then we will continue to see this kind of violence being visited upon citizens by police, regardless of whether those police officers are white or non-white. That's an important contention. And it's important to understand that because, as the next slide points out, police are viewed generally with suspicion. And they're viewed as agents of brutality because their brutality has been witnessed time and time again. And those who respect and support the police, it would appear that those who respect and support them most strongly are those among the elites who have property, right, that they want the police to protect, which of course, as we pointed out earlier, this was the very reason why the police was established in the first place, certainly in the United States and in the UK, to protect the property of the elite. So how do we overcome, or how do we address some of these shortcomings? How do you address this tension between a dynamic and modernizing society and a police institution, a police service that is rooted in time with practices that are not consistent with the needs of a changing and dynamic society? This is where I'm proposing, next slide please, Daniela. I'm proposing that police institutions, whether in Brazil or elsewhere, and there is evidence that some of this is taking place, that they need to see the society in a much more complex way rather than a simple linear way, whereby if you have an idea of what has happened in the past, then you can bring that and use that to address a problem in the present. I'm saying here that we need something different. We need, and I'm drawing this from engineering, right? We need complex adaptive systems. We need to be adaptable because society is complex. Individuals are complex. And complex adaptive systems are not closed like the police. They're not static. They're not controllable. They're not predictable because they are open, right? And they respond to and provide for dynamism and change. So that complex adaptive systems call for organizational and tactical or strategic flexibility. So I guess what I'm suggesting here very strongly is that effective policing for the 21st century has got to reflect fundamental changes in the approaches that the police take towards social problems. Otherwise, you will find that the tension that has always existed based on biases and conceived notions of particular communities and particular individuals from various communities, that those will continue to be a problem. What was it about me walking the streets of Sao Paulo that caused two members of the Polícia Militar just out of the blue to pick me out and put me through, this sort of very uncomfortable procedure? What biases, what preconceived notions did they have about seeing someone like me, and sort of cause them to make the decisions that they did? I'm asking this question much more broadly because I took some time following that incident to do my own research into policing in Sao Paulo, but about the social and economic organization or economic structure of the city. And it turns out that over 100 years ago, the population of Sao Paulo was about 200,000 people. 200,000 people. The population of Sao Paulo today is between 12 and 14 million, which means most of the people in Sao Paulo did not originate in Sao Paulo. But more importantly, Sao Paulo, as the business capital of the country, is host and home to many different types of visitors. I was there as an educational tourist. There are others who come there as sports tourists to go to watch the games at Manaka Stadium, to watch flamenco and other football, to go to football camp. There's so many other reasons. And of course, for business as well. Now, I thought about this. There, between 1999 and 2004, if I remember correctly, the tech sector in Sao Paulo grew by 275%. That's the kind of figure I remembered. And I encountered, during my last visit to Sao Paulo, people from Holland, the Netherlands, from other parts of Europe, other parts of Africa, who had been recruited to come to Sao Paulo, right, as tech, people to work in the tech sector, because this is a growing sector for the country. And so I asked myself this question, and I'm asking this of everyone in the audience, wherever they are, what actually is the role of the police? And in the case of Sao Paulo, in my view, the police are there to ensure that among other things, the economic aspect of the society, of the city, of the state is protected. So here am I as an educational tourist. I come there, I have resources, I'm there as part of the United States soft power. I have resources that are going to contribute to the economic development of the city. I'm going to be staying in a hotel for 2 months. I'm going to be using public transportation. I'm going to be taking taxis. I'm going to be eating in restaurants. I'm going to be doing all these other things, contributing to the economic lifeblood of society. Why is it that the police don't understand that their role is to help ensure that the economic lifeblood of the city is protected? Or if they understand that that's the case, how do they distinguish between those who would presumably be undermining that objective and those who are contributing to it? Why might I have been perceived as someone quite likely to be undermining the economic imperative of the city rather than contributing to it? So I think my point here is that there is an opportunity for the police in Sao Paulo in particular to understand that in a changing and dynamic society, the traditional role of arrest, prosecute, and of course, imprison, as the case may be, has got to be a little more sophisticated. There are going to be many, many people come to a given society, a given country, a given city, who perhaps don't understand the mores, the culture, and may do something that may actually, in fact, be unacceptable. Should the police automatically criminalize them? Or should they be sufficiently educated in the fact that the city of Sao Paulo has become far more cosmopolitan, far more international than it has ever been, and that there ought to be a corresponding level of educational development within the police force to enable them to recognize this and to be much more flexible in the approach. So I'm saying that there ought to be perhaps some remedial work or some new introductions into the curriculum for police training that reflects an understanding of a growing, dynamic, and complex society, and that the institution that provides security has got to be similarly dynamic and flexible in order to effectively, certainly more effectively, serve society. So next slide, please, Gabriela. What does that mean then? It means that the history and the tradition of predictability and reliability and controllability, to use that word, that cannot be the medium and the mechanism by which a growing and dynamic society is protected. The police have got to recognize that uncertainty exists, and they have got to embrace uncertainty. They have got to experiment and learn. They've got to be agile and willing to modify the approach as circumstances change. Otherwise, there will always be, and there will continue to be, some of the problems that we continue to see being visited upon unsuspecting people like yours truly. And I want to make one final slide before, just to underscore the point. So, Gabriela, could you just turn to the final slide? So when I'm talking about complex adaptive systems, and this is not my slide because I have a different view of a design of a complex adaptive system, but I just didn't have the time and I didn't have the software to really put it together. But at least this gives an idea about what I mean by the importance and the need to understand that society is changing, society is dynamic, and similarly, police have got to be changing accordingly. And so I want to stop here because I think it would be most helpful if the students have questions and we can sort of have a conversation about that.
Thank you so much, Professor Clifford. Daniela and I were going to try to organize the questions. Daniela, would you like to translate the first question you just sent me? I think it's a very, very important, useful question for this conversation. The first one you sent me.
Sure. Just a minute. What strategies can be suggested for the police to adopt greater strategic and operational flexibility? And what risks might this entail?
Okay, what risk this might entail? What was the first part? What strategies? Say again?
What strategies can be suggested for the police to adopt greater strategic and operational flexibility?
Yeah. That question actually, I like that question because it speaks to the argument that I've been making. So first, I think the first thing is an acknowledgement, clear acknowledgement, that the police are operating. If we use, say, Sao Paulo, a huge city like Sao Paulo as an example, it is important that police understand the nature of the city, first of all. The composition of the city, who is in the city. And I would suggest from my own research, it says that about 5%, I don't want to get the figure wrong. Between 2 and 5% of the population of Sao Paulo is international.
Yes.
That means, is that correct, Professor?
Yes,
okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So so when you talk about Brazil and Sao Paulo, it's not all things Brazil. There is there all this the segmentation within society. Society like Brazil, society like the United States are racially segmented societies. We have, we have peninsulares, you have various admixtures and so on. Then you have the city compartmentalized economically and structurally. Then you have a highly educated but tiny elite. You have an educational system that has been bringing the federal system that's bringing more education to wider numbers of people. Like USP, our own USP has recently opened its doors, right, to more non-white students. So there is an increasing. There are many areas in which the society is changing before the very eyes of those who have been asked to be responsible for providing safety and security. Unless then the police understand and recognize this change. If they don't do that, then it means that they're stuck in the old stereotypes, in the old biases, in the old perspectives. And they would unwittingly and inadvertently bring those biases to bear upon people who don't deserve it, who have a different approach to life because they're younger, they're much more technologically savvy, they're much more connected with the larger world, and so their orientation, right? They're basically global citizens because they're connected globally through technology. And so there has got to be, in my view, and I don't want to use the word re-education, but there needs to be some modules in the police training curriculum that helps understand what the internationalization of a city really means. And in that regard, how the training then must reflect those changes, which then would bring different policies, different initiatives, and a different way of looking at the city and looking at the people in the city. Now, the second part of the question was, what are some of the risks? I think the risk lies with the failure of the institution, of the organization, to recognize and implement these practices. I answered the question by going back to the concept of feedback loop. I remember having this conversation with a former student of mine. I've been talking to him about this project, and he reminded me that there is a disconnect between the justice system, the courts, and the police. When the courts render a decision, that the implications of that decision don't feed back into the policing process. They use a process to get them to the courts render a decision. There's no feedback loop from which the police can learn, well, the next time we encounter this may be, we ought to do this differently. And so the same thing is repeated. And so the answer to your question is this: the risk is to repeat the same mistake over and over again if the institution is not open to change, if it's not flexible, it's not agile.
Thank you, Professor.
Daniela, allow me to translate one question to Professor Clifford. Is the question regarding this very, very Brazilian, very important question in Brazil, is related to the gendarmerie nature of our police in Brazil. We call it military police. We call it's organized as a military police, not in the sense that it's a part of the army, but it's basically inspired by the French model of police force, the Portuguese, the Spanish. It's very European. It's not North American. I mean, by that, it's not a local police connected to the community. It's basically a police connected to the state, for the state organization, the state institutions, and the state elite. And so the question is, many questions are related to this dimension, is about how you see this form or this institutional organization as a problem for racism, for the behavior you described in your presentation. I mean, is a gendarmerie, a police that is organized as a gendarme, a problem for us in terms of how to deal with the difference? This is a very important question in Brazil, and you know, please.
Yes. It's from an outsider looking in, right? From an outsider looking in. I don't want to consider myself an outsider. I mean, I've been spent a lot of time in Brazil. I really enjoy my time there and my collaborations and friendships that I've built up, the culture and all of that stuff. But the question is profound and provocative. And here is what I truly think. After my incident, I really went to do some serious research about the different levels of policing in Brazil and understood, you described it as a gendarmerie, but Polícia Militar, in one report I discovered, this is a summary, right? In a nutshell of what some of the respondents to that survey said. During training, they strip us down. They dehumanize us. They treat us like dogs, quote unquote. And then they want us to go out there, right, and protect the people. They prepared us to see the people as the enemy. So if you have, and I'm not sure what the nature of the training is, but if you are trained in the form of a military, well, a military's role is to fight an enemy. So if that's the culture and structure of this organization, then who is the enemy that you're going out there to fight? So to me, that is the rhetorical and the practical conundrum that policing in Brazil, particularly the term Polícia Militar, I mean, the militar part of it is profoundly, psychologically, if not substantially, bothersome, it's worrisome. Because, you know, it's different. Polícia Civil, that has a nice democratic, you know, normal ring to it. But you say Polícia Militar, right? That has, you know, it resonates differently. And so the larger question is, do I think that that's, well, you yourself, Professor Pickett, have intimated that Brazilians see this as a problem, right? But I would say this as well. You know, I worked on this project with called at NEV, looking at 25 years of democracy in Brazil. And it's a fascinating project. And one of the amazing revelations, we compared Argentina and Chile and Brazil, right, as three countries that have transitioned from authoritarianism, right, and so on. But there remains this residue, remains this overhang of authoritarianism. I can tell you this, one of my colleagues at USP came to a meeting one day and she was quite bothered, very disturbed, because she was stuck in traffic for about 45 minutes because, as she said it, some young people, they were out there demonstrating and blocking up traffic and so on, right? And that back in the day, right, in the military period, this would not have happened, right? So this is part of what I'm suggesting that is problematic, more broadly speaking, for the police, where the society is changing, where people are developing new norms, new expectations. They have a new set of perspectives on the society, and they want the country and the government to address issues of equity and you know and all those other things. But then there is that other segment that is concerned about law and order, right? Law and order. And that is part of the tension. And of course, the police, including police and military, they are responsible for ensuring and maintaining law and order. And anything that sort of deviates from that, anyone, right, any organization, any entity is perceived, in my view, as a potential threat to the established order. And then so the power, the heavy hand on police and military is visited upon them, among other things. So in general, I'm not sure, Professor Piquet, that you guys want me, right, to tell you that. You already know that. Maybe it might be just sufficient. My only contribution is to say that, yes, based on my observation and based on my interaction and experience, it would seem to me, I'm being diplomatic and political here, it would seem to me that you guys are on the right track in trying to question not the validity, but maybe the way in which this particular unit of the security services is allowed to function.
Fantastic, Clifford. Thank you very much. Fantastic.
So remember, Professor Piquet, I want to be able to come back to Sao Paulo, right? I don't want to burn my bridges here.
Let me, please, Daniela. We have dozens of questions here.
That's considering the complex system, how do you view the issue of police communication, especially during the interactions with the public?
So there is absolutely no question, right, that an effective communication strategy is absolutely critical to any circumstance. So this then raises the question, does the Polícia Militar have a communication strategy, right? How does it go about communicating and conveying its ideas? In some societies, I could sort of reference in the English-speaking Caribbean, say Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados for that matter. From time to time, we have chiefs of police or their deputies being interviewed on TV, on radio about events that are taking place in the society. So as a public outreach, right, where the police are trying to engage, provide for engagement between the institution and members of the society over particular issues that are of relevance to both. So I would first ask the question, what is the nature of the communication strategy that exists? Is there one? And what is its nature? What is it designed to do? What are the channels of communication? Does the institution have its own medium, newspaper, TV, or does it work through any of the local, private, or government media outlets? Is there some regular pattern by which communication is being structured and organized? So the answer to the question lies for me in the unknown. I don't know the nature of the communication system if one exists, but I think for the questioner, the answer should be, is there one? How is it designed? Who represents the organization? What are some of the types of issues that are being communicated? How often? And is the organization approachable? Can a citizen or a citizen group approach the organization for assistance, if you will, or for information or insights about addressing maybe a problem in a given community? What opportunities are there to make the organization accessible to the public? I wonder if that is feasible from the point of view that the Policia Militar reflects the state governing apparatus, and the local communities, for example, in the Jardines or up in Pineros or any of these other communities, if there aren't any sort of local precincts or community-based policing organizations that the local community members can reach out to, then it might be more difficult for them to reach an entity that's really statewide. And so I think in the short, one has to examine the organization, if it has a communication strategy, how is that undertaken? Who represents? Does it have lines of communication, for example? Is there a tips line? Is there an opportunity for someone to have an organization to meet with the members of the organization? There are all these mechanisms that I think are relevant, but I'm not sure. I don't know if any in place, but I would think that those things need to be investigated as a way of trying to foster that communication, that dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Clifford. We have one more question here. How do the structures and policies of the state perpetuate systemic racism with policing practices?
Okay, say it again, please.
How do the structures and policies of the state perpetuate systemic racism within policing practices?
Well, lots of people who are much smarter than I am, I'm pretty sure, have tried to answer that question. So it's going to be impossible for me to effectively answer that in a couple of minutes. But I'll make it.
The people younger than us are
right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think as I started out my talk, I said context is important and history is important, right? And so how are the entities structured? How is the state structured? I read you some quotes from different entities about the role of the police, and they all speak to protection of property. It goes all the way back to colonial times. And part of the protection of property, right, is to make sure that those who don't own property and those who are considered property, including non-white peoples, right, are kept in their place, right? So I would say that society in Brazil, just like in the United States, United Kingdom, is racially and economically stratified. That's the structure. Now, within that structure, you do find that members of these different strata are able to obtain wealth and property. And so when they obtain wealth and property, they too are going to require a demand protection from the state. Again, another aspect of the discussion with this friend of mine, is from a student of mine, makes the point. When the young African-American Michael Brown was killed and people started burning shops and homes in that neighborhood, you had members of that community, while they were upset about what had happened to Michael Brown by the police, they were more upset with those people who were burning their property that they had worked so hard to build up, right? So in other words, the society makes it challenging for marginalized people to really get a strong foothold into the society. Once you've gotten that foothold, you become conservative. You want to maintain the property that you have worked so hard to obtain. You are not going to be happy to see that property going up in flames, right? So I guess my point is this, that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you are a property owner among the elite or you're a property owner among the middle class or the working class or the marginal. As long as you're a property owner, you are going to want protection. But of course, those who don't have property, they are going to also be looking and demanding benefits from the state. So this tension will continue, because in a society, and this I'm going to make an argument here that is not very popular these days, because it's basically Marxist, right? So the capitalist system is about exploitation and accumulation, and lots of members of society become sort of throwaway humans, right? And exploitable, disposable, dispensable. And so when they strike back at the system, this is what we get, right? The frustration that boils over from the deprivation. Here in the United States, we recognize that the African-American experience, broadly speaking, has been set back every step of the way. African-Americans went and fought in World War II, just like white Americans. When they came back, white Americans were given the opportunity to build homes. Government supported the loans. The African-Americans were not given the same, right? Banks were redlining them, saying, don't sell property to African-Americans. So you have a society in which the theoretical and the philosophical perspective is that it's a democracy and it's freedom, right? But in terms of the way that resources are allocated and distributed, it's neither equal nor free. And so understanding that that's the structure and nature of the society, to me, that's critically important. And anything that one attempts to do must be done with a clear understanding of the obstacles that one is likely to encounter if they try to push too hard against the status quo. And those who are going to defend the status quo are the very same police that we're talking about, because their role and responsibility is to protect property. I would end and say this. In the United States, it's often said that you're much more likely to get away with murder than to get away with someone else's property. and that the motivation in the United States was not about life, liberty, and happiness. It was life, liberty, and property. Right? So that's my sort of spin on that.
Thank you, Professor Clifford. Let me call Dr. June Suma. Dr. June Suma is the chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, and was invited by you, Professor Clifford, to join us. And we are very glad of having Professor Dr. June presence here. And I think we have a very interesting question from Dr. June. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to say something. I put it in the chat because I wanted it addressed there, but my question is on whether or not you think that in Brazil, the police force and policing has been decolonized enough for you to be able to look at policing specifically outside of the greater systems and racialized systems that exist in the country. Policing is just one part of a criminal system, or a system that has criminalized race. And that includes all other aspects of the system, whether they be political or legal. So how are we going to then enable the police, even through intensive education programs, to break through a system that seems to be a global one, not simply one in Brazil? It exists in all of the countries in Latin America that you spoke to. It exists to the north of Brazil in America, in North America. It exists across the pond in Europe, where this color of your skin is automatically criminalizes you. So your experience then in Sao Paulo is because of a culture, on a global culture, not simply something in Brazil, that encouraged a policeman, no matter what his color is, because he doesn't associate himself with your color, to treat you in that way. So isn't it, what can we do to help the police in Brazil then decolonize their thinking and their minds against race and criminality?
My dear friend, Professor Dr. June Suma, what a profoundly provocative and well-articulated question. This is, Professor Piquet and everybody, this is consistent here. This is the way my friend is. By the way, she's a historian. So when she's speaking with the breadth and depth of knowledge of the history of these events. Yes. So let me say this. One of the things that I hope that this conversation, will enable me to do. So give me a minute, let me answer your question, June. I'm putting it into context because—
No problem.
Yeah. So when I had this event back a year and a half ago, I was asked by my host, Professor Cristiane Andrade Canero, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? What do I want to do? Should she run it up the chain and so on? I took about 2.5 weeks before I responded, and I did my research, as I was saying. And in the research, I drew that very same conclusion that you alluded to, is, you know, the colonialization of the process, right? And so I thought to myself, well, what I have going for me that is different from the typical, say, Afro-Brazilian or other colorized criminal, or some person who's colorized and criminalized by the color, is that I have the weight of the power of the US State Department, you know, the Fulbright organization. I have the power of the Institute of International Relations at USP on my side. But the average person doesn't have these kinds of resources. So in my own small way, I've been trying to work with Professor Sanchez, who is in charge of the, that's what Professor Colonel Sanchez, sorry. There's a unit of the Police and Military that's on USP campus. I met with him some time ago. The unfortunate thing is that our correspondence back and forth, there's a firewall. Every time I try to respond to him, I don't get through. But he has in his shop a human rights unit that he's trying to utilize that as a basis for trying to make change within the organization. And I offered to him my service to work along with him in that regard. So the short answer to your question is this. In my view, we have to take small steps. And so what I'm trying to do, and I'm hoping that Professor Piquet will use this opportunity to reconnect me with with Colonel Sanchez, to let him know that, especially since my dear friend has raised this issue, right, that we need to continue to work on this project. So June, thank you so much for raising that question. And my answer is this. It's going to take time, just like everywhere else. But I also do know that there are cadres of groups and individuals in Brazil who are very, very much concerned about this. And Professor Piquet's question about the Police and Military and its overreach, and that speaks to all of those issues. So thank you for galvanizing our thoughts around and really framing what I've been trying to present as a sort of intellectual / policy exercise without getting to the core of the matter, which you always so effectively manage to, you know, to focus our attention. Yes, it is still the legacy and remnants of coloniality. I wanted to say that in the case of Jamaica, where we see violence visited upon other Jamaicans by Jamaicans of the same color, what does that say? The institutions that maintain the division of labor and the organization of labor and resources were inherited by those who now run the former colonial state. But what has not changed is the culture of the organization. So we have, I would say this, if your hands are tied with white rope and you loose them, and your hands are tied with black rope, your hands are still tied. And I think that's the situation in which we find ourselves here. So, but we have our generous host here who, if you wanted to add some more insights, I'm sure Professor Piquet will allow you to do so.
Thank you very much for answering my question, because I think that we can do both things at the same time. What you see as a small contribution is not really a small contribution. The fact is, you have to break down systems from inside and from outside for you to be able to get to the point where you have change. And so whatever you're doing inside with regard to policing and is also an attempt to attack systemic racism and the institutions that ensure that these discriminations are perpetuated. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Professor
Well,
Piquet?
Professor Clifford, Dr. Sommer, the next time we will this is the first time we are offering this course on racism and the police work. And I think the next time we need to invite Dr. Sommer to join us
Absolutely.
as a panelist. I think we are learning a lot, Professor Clifford, and this was fantastic. It was an incredible night. And for me, it was, well, all I need to thank you, to thank Dr. Sommer and all our students. I think we really going through a reflection about racism in Brazil, a discussion. It's a very difficult subject. We need to learn. We need to be open to differences, to different views. It's a very important, Professor Clifford. What you delivered tonight was really something that changed the way I do the question, and so this idea of complexity was fantastic. So thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Sommer. Thank all the students and participants in this evening, and that's it. We get to the close to the seminar, please.
Yes. It was a pleasure, and I'll reach out to you by email for some further thoughts and way forward.
Fantastic.
All right.
We
Thank
need
you.
your
All
feedback and support.
Okay.
Thank you,
Daniela,
Dr.
good to see you. Thank you. Night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay.